We are going to discuss a very important topic, the access to electricity in Africa, how to measure it. So we are going to have a very good speaker from World Bank, IEA, Africa, Kenya, and Benin. So before that, let me give a floor to Mr. Rashid Ali Abdallah, the Executive Director of Africa, for his open remark. Director, please have a floor.
Thank you very much, Samson. Uh, Distinguished participants, esteemed colleagues from Ministry of Energy and National Statistic Office of African Member States, dear panelists, our national focal point and coordinator for African Member States, representative development partners, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. First of all, on behalf of African Energy Commission, I would like to welcome you all to this very important webinar, where we are going to discuss a very important topic on how we're measuring access to electricity in Africa. First of all, allow me to just bring to your attention 5 facts, if I can say. First of all, it is well known widely that 600 million Africans have no access to electricity. This figure is stagnant for a quite long time, despite the efforts and the progress that African member states made on expanding access to electricity. The second point I need to bring it to your attention that electricity itself represents now currently only 20% of the global energy supply, while in Africa represent only 16%. By 2050, electricity is expected to represent 50% of the global energy supply. And I think Africa, it will not be exceptional. We expect that the electricity supply, it will increase due to the new application of this very important energy resources, including AI data center. The third factor that Africa is currently only represent 20% of the global population, account for 1.4 billion. By 2050, Africa population almost will double to reach 2.5 billion. And by 2100, our Africa population will be expected to be 4.3 billion, which it is expected to be 40% of the global population. So energy or electricity access in Africa definitely will dominate or affect the global or universal energy access globally. The fourth fact I need to bring to your attention also, despite the importance of electricity access indicator, there is no single international accepted and internationally adopted definition of modern energy access and energy electricity. In Africa, and since 2012, we are collecting energy statistics from all African member states, and often we came to cross the same question: what's the definition of electricity access? And I think this question where we need to answer or try to answer today. Additionally, quality of supply, such as technical availability, adequacy, reliability, convenience, safety, and affordability are ignored in sometimes when we are collecting data on access to electricity. And of course, data quality itself in terms of the energy access is an issue. So having said that, and giving this fact, administrative data source currently remains the primary source data for measuring access to electricity in Africa. Furthermore, Africa lacks uniform continental methodology for measuring access to electricity. This does not allow proper comparison of electricity access indicator between African member states and their aggregation to produce indicator at the regional and continental level. As a specialized agency of African Union in charge of energy, we believe that there is an urgent need for Africa to develop a unique continental methodology and definition for measuring access to electricity, and to advocate and support African countries in producing indicators on access to electricity based on the continental methodology and harmonized methodology. This will allow for quality, update, and harmonize indicators and measuring access to electricity at the national, regional, and continental level. The African Energy Commission organized this webinar to discuss the current status of measuring access to electricity at the global level, continental level, regional, and national level. And we need to benefit really from the best practice so that we can be adopted in Africa. During this webinar, we are graced by international organizations such as World Bank and International Energy Agency, who will present their experience on measuring access to electricity as a part of the implementation of 2030 agenda, particularly Goal 7. Africa will also present its vision on measuring access to electricity as a part of the implementation of the United or SDG 7 and African Union Agenda 2063. Our member state, Kenya and Benin, will present their experience as well on how they measuring access to electricity. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to conclude my remark by informing you that next African Energy Commission webinar, which will be take place in April, will focus on measuring green gross domestic product, the green gross domestic product as a progressive approach to measuring economic performance by integrating environmental consideration. And of course, before I conclude, I need to thank all panelists from EIA, World Bank, and our member states for accepting to join us in this webinar and sharing their experience. And I'm very sure their experience will help us to shape our approach on how to harmonize measuring of energy access in Africa. And also we are happy with all participants joining us to discuss this topic. And by this remark, I will end my opening remark and I hand over to Samson. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Director, to set up the scene of this very important webinar. I think we are going to have a very good discussion today. So let me proceed straight to the first panelist, our colleague from IEA, who will give us a very good experience, a rich experience of that international organization on measurement of access to electricity. And then I'm sure that during his presentation, he will focus also on some experience in the African continent. So Bruno, please, you have the floor. So you can share your screen and proceed.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Samson, and thank you so much, Director Abdallah, for your remarks. Let me also thank you more broadly, everyone that is tuning in today, despite being in the month of Ramadan. So maybe some people will have a little bit of low energy, but I'll make this very straightforward and try to make it as interesting as possible. So Ramadan Kareem to everyone that is currently in doing it. So just very quick word of introduction on the IEA. We are an intergovernmental organization headquartered in Paris. We recently also opened our first regional office in Singapore. And at the moment, we have very strong ongoing institutional engagement with African countries. We have 5 IEA association countries that are Egypt, Kenya, Morocco, Senegal, and South Africa. And we also have strategic partnerships with the African Union, the African Development Bank, with which we have regular collaboration among other entities in the region. here are just some of the pictures to give like an idea of some of the engagement that we do. So the first one on the top left is our recent summit on clean cooking that we hosted last year, together with the president of Tanzania, the prime minister of Norway, the president of the African Development Bank, and we were joined as well by the presidents of Togo and Sierra Leone. So that was a very high-level event that kind of wanted to mobilize, in this case, particularly for clean cooking, a little bit of momentum and commitments to get a bit more push for that particular SDG. Other roles that we play, we also do specific energy transition plans bilaterally with countries that request our help to try to map the most comprehensive way a decarbonization roadmap for their particular countries. In this case, one of the most recent one was with Uganda that we did bilaterally with them. So just another example of some of our engagement. We also do a lot of capacity building. Since 2011, we have trained something like 3,000 policymakers and energy professionals globally through specialized workshops, webinars, targeted training sessions, trying to create that national capacity on statistics, energy transitions, energy efficiency, and other key topics. So some of the most recent events were in Namibia, in Italy, in Ghana, in Kenya, where we have these workshops that usually go on for like multiple days or weeks to try to really build that national capacity in the country level. At the moment, we're also working very closely with South Africa's G20 presidency on the energy transition working group agenda, where clean cooking and electricity access in Africa are certainly a major focus for their presidency, and something that they want to understand better more at the continental level. And so just to conclude on this first introductory part, the IEA as an institution has been the first to produce the global database of electricity access information that we maintain since the early 2000s. So it's something that we have a lot of institutional knowledge on. And we're also, together with the World Bank and some other international organizations, we're official co-custodians of SDG 7. So we do participate in the tracking of the different indicators within this SDG. And we also provide projections out to 2030 on how we see electricity access, clean cooking, as well as other SDG 7 indicators playing out to 2030. So as an example, we were, through the data gathering that we do and our projections, we were the first organization to announce the setbacks on electricity access due to the COVID-19 pandemic, which have now been confirmed by the formal statistics that the country released, the statistics that are released, at the country level. So this is some of, again, just to speak about the institutional knowledge and capability that we have. Now, jumping a little bit more on data, as Director Abdallah rightly pointed out, the number of people without access today in sub-Saharan Africa, and here we exclude, in our modeling, South Africa, it has been stagnant around 600 million people over the past years. And this is not to say that nothing has been done. It simply shows that population growth has roughly met the same pace of progress when it comes to the deployment of electricity access. So in terms of the definition, since the director rightly pointed out that there is not like a universal definition, we define electricity access as a household receiving enough electricity to provide a certain minimum level that I will talk about now of energy services that are able of growing over time. So we start with a basic bundle of electricity access that is basically, like a light bulb able to provide lighting, phone charging, and a radio. That has a rough equivalent of like 50 to 75 kilowatt hours annually per household. Then we move on to an essential bundle that includes more light bulbs, a fan working for a certain amount of hours during the day, a television for 2 hours per day. Then we move on to an extended bundle, and then finally to what we call modern energy minimum, where we would be kind of on par with advanced economies. I'm not going to go into the detail with all of this, but just to say that we have basically like well-defined 4 categories of energy access that we described in detail on like how do we see them, what do we see being comprised within those. And this information, as well as everything that I'm going to present here today, is available on our website, and I'll talk about that a bit later as well. So talking about the resources that we have available, electricity access data can be collected basically either doing supply side or demand side. assessments. On our side, the IEA, what we do is mainly based on supply sources. However, the resulting rates are in most cases comparable with demand side data resources. And I will talk about the difference between these two now in a second, between supply side and demand side, and how to do that assessment. But now maybe speaking a little bit more about this guide that we put out recently. It's basically like a very concrete step-by-step guide on how to develop access to electricity indicators using supply side. And so for supply side has a lot of advantages that I will look at a bit more in detail later as well, but mainly it's more accessible, more cost effective, and allows for more timely estimates on electricity access, whereas demand side usually comes in the form of census or surveys that are held either every 5 or 7 years, maybe sometimes even 10 years apart. So these ones allow for a much more recent statistical value that can be used for tracking this indicator of electricity access. In the guidebook, you will see a lot of methodology, to estimate how to provide off-grid technologies as well, including mini-grids and standalone systems. But I don't want to spend too much time on this. Anyway, the guide, just to say that this is freely available on our website, and you can have a look at that, and we welcome any questions on your part if you have any. Now, talking a little bit about supply and demand side. So as I mentioned briefly before, supply side is collected in the form usually of the companies that provide electricity services to end users. So these are utilities, distribution services, and mini-grids operators, solar home system distributors, among others. Whereas on the other hand, demand side relies on the direct reporting of the access status by consumers via surveys or censuses. So these surveys and censuses usually take place many years apart. We're talking 5 to up to 10 years apart typically. And there's several advantages and challenges to each of them. You can see some of those in the screen as well as on our guide, but I'll be able to take questions on that later. I don't want to take too much of your time now. But in terms of our methodology, the one that we use to track electricity access, again, from a supply side perspective, we start with data collection, which begins by working with the data providers, as I mentioned before, utilities, companies, etc., on the collection and submission process for a certain data that has a grid. So again, the data that is provided, it changes, but it has to be standardized. Sometimes it can be like the power that is provided to certain households or end users. But yeah, it needs to be like agreed upon before that data collection process starts. In terms of data validation, so this is basically just to check to ensure that the quality and accuracy of the data is there. And if problems are identified, then we would interface with the data provider to address any issues in terms of inconsistency. For example, this could be if you have a sudden variation in the connection numbers between 2 periods. So this would be a red flag if you see like a very sudden change between 2 years. Then for the data processing, this is basically when we take the raw data that has come through this process of data collection to calculate the final indicator, such as in this case is access to electricity, the rate of access to electricity. And the data validation also occurs to some extent in this step, where we're able to see if underlying problems are uncovered. Statisticians here would need to go back to the original data provider and again, kind of follow up if they see any kind of inconsistency. And then the last process, which is also part of what I'm doing here today, is the data dissemination, which is after everything has been vetted, processed, etc., we start publishing and share our data through reports, databases, and the like that are typically, we try to make it obviously as accessible and understandable as possible. So this is, for example, like a very straightforward example of, like how DS, which would be demand side, SS supplies, supply side sources, they can complement each other. For example, here we can see that we have a big mismatch in, for instance, like in the case of mini grids for 2015. So having both data points can help us calibrate here and follow up with the given authorities if we see a very big mismatch for a particular year and for a particular type of connection. Then we have the in-between years where a survey is not being conducted or a census is not being conducted. And here, obviously, supply side data, which is the kind of data that we mainly deal with at the IEA, becomes obviously critical, right? To be able to like accurately have a picture of what's happening until the next survey comes for that particular country. And once that survey comes in, that information can also help recalibrate some of the previous supply side data that we got. So this is just to give a broad picture of like basically what happens with each survey, the things that you can spot doing a double approach of demand and supply side, but also how key supply side is for getting reliable data for all of those years in between your census or survey data until that comes in. Here, the kind of like counting that we do, so it roughly falls onto 3 buckets. We have the grid connections, which this can be derived from, again, mainly the electric utility or distribution company. However, here, the granularity of the data, such as the breakdown of connections by residential and small commercial customers, might not always be available. So each of these counting methods has, a little bit of caveats that one needs to be aware of, and these are discussed at length in our guide. And we also provide recommendation of how to deal with some of those issues that you can encounter when trying to count those connections. In the case of mini grids, this is relatively similar to grid connections in that the number of customers is collected by type, so residential, commercial, industrial, but this might not be available on the consumption level or capacity that are gathered. So ideally, the tracking data from all operational mini grids would happen recording the location and the type, so whether it's solar, diesel, hybrid, does it have battery storage or not? And also like in obviously the units that are being recorded. And last but not least, we have standalone system, which today are most commonly either fossil fuel generators like diesel gensets or solar home systems. And these are often sold or distributed to consumers directly. And capturing this kind of connection relies heavily on counting the systems delivered by the distributor. So here is like the company, the one that should report, or where we could get the data basically if a certain distributor or company would tell us how many of these systems have they sold and where. Finally, here I just wanted to give like a quick overview of the collection template that we use to gather this data from different countries. So the way that we do this supply side analysis is basically by communicating bilaterally with each of the African countries where we have counterparts. This is typically the Ministry of Energy, but it can also be a National Statistics Office and whatnot. So for most of you that are here today joining us from Africa, if you work at a ministry or a statistical office, you've probably got an email from energyaccess@iea.org. That's us asking for the data submission. And also this template, just to say that is available on our website, but we're in the process of gathering this data. We usually do this on Q1 of each year. So thank you so much to those of you that have already submitted the data, and we strongly encourage those that have not still submitted the data to please do so and reach out to us if they have any questions. You can also reach to us on this email address if for whatever reason you don't seem to have received this template yet. So now moving on, and just I'm about to conclude, sorry, I'm mindful of the time. I just wanted to draw the point here a little bit on like the disparity that we see today in terms of annual investments for electricity access, but also for clean cooking. The level of investments that we have most recently in 2023 and the level of annual investment that we should reach out to 2030 in order to reach full access. And just to say that one of the major things that can really help drive more investment is reliable, timely data. So we have seen across other industries as well how having this kind of like timely and real-time visibility for investors has made a huge difference in the market in terms of like mobilizing investments for, in this case, it would be for access, but it's really crucial to be able to know, like what's happening on the ground for companies to have the confidence to also enter those markets. So there is a strong economic case for, like better data recording. And we applaud any efforts that, like AFREC might be doing in terms of, like trying to have a standard, a comprehensive way of how to approach this at a continental level. And maybe last but not least, just some additional resources. Again, I'm not trying to do a sales pitch here. All of this is freely available on our website. So you can find all of these resources for free. And please, any questions that you might have, happy to take those as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Bruno, for this very wonderful and comprehensive presentation. I will advise you to look at the chat. There are already a lot of questions for you. So I think you have a lot to do there. So let's now move to the next speaker. It's another international organization, World Bank. Mr. Sandy, please, you have a floor.
So a lot of speakers have already covered some of the points here, but I think we wanted to sort of come on this later. I'll focus a little bit on what the scope of SDG is. So it is covering 219 countries where data is being collected from national statistical offices, and it is being cleaned, tracked, and so forth. And after that, we look at what proportion of people have access or do not have access to electricity. Similarly, we also track clean cooking and other energy-related information. But basically, given that you have so many countries, and given that we are talking about sort of surveys that have been done, it's important to understand that as we are getting closer and closer to, let's say, universal access, where Africa stands is that a bulk of the lack of access or the gap in access is now in Africa. And that is why we are focusing in on Africa as the place for making the progress and closing the gaps. When we look at sort of the types of data, it's sort of over here. And because these surveys don't normally happen as often, what we will have is there are gaps in timing when one survey happens in another. And so there are ways in which we extrapolate to see how that progress has been made. We cross-check that with some of the tools that we've mentioned here, the multi-tier framework, the Global Electrification Database, and the Global Electrification Platform. So what we do within the bank is we will have some satellite data. We will see at night what the brightness is. We try to calibrate that. And then using that, some of that, we come up with, what looks like the appropriate picture, particularly in those cases where we are finding that the extrapolations are not giving us the right or the best answers. Bottom line, though, is that I think it's very important for us to improve more and more the on-ground data collection and to improve the interface and the interaction with the national statistical offices. Because at the end of the day, you on the ground are in the best place to give us the best data that we then have to use. One other point that is worth mentioning with respect to the electricity gap is that, in fact, this electricity gap increasingly is in areas which are harder to reach. They are in countries where you find FCV, fragility, conflict situations. And in those types of places, it becomes more and more important that the paucity of data that we have, or the thin data that we have, is improved in ways using the modern techniques that we are talking about, so that we have some view of how progress is being made, as well as monitor it more closely. So that's why I brought in to the picture these other pieces. Coming back to that key point on frequency of censuses, you will see from this chart that there is 2 to 3 years for about 40% of the countries that constitute AFREC that they do the survey. And then there are another 34 countries, or 34% of the countries, which have as much as 3 to 4 years between surveys. So in other words, there is a gap, and there are modern techniques that we need to use, whether it's big data, whether it's satellite, and so forth, to be able to get the bigger picture. Now, the second or the next thing that I wanted to focus in on, by the way, it's important to have sort of a quick look at these figures here. And this pie chart has been prepared for the 55 countries that are the AFREC members. So you can see the breakdown over here of how frequently the data is being collected, but then there is the issue of how accurate that data is, right? So before I go into that, let me pause a little bit and talk about off-grid. The reason I do this is because, as I said, there are many countries where the access gap is largest, where in fact you will have situations where the grid expansion is either not happening as rapidly as it should, or in other cases, it may not make sense for the grid expansion to happen because at the end of the transmission line, the per capita use of electricity is indeed very small. So the cost of extending the grid is sometimes not justifiable for the amount of power that would be flowing through that grid. So keeping these things in mind, and I will go back to the previous slide, we need then to look at how can we still electrify and get the targets that we want. And to me, the way to do it would be through off-grid, mini-grid, and those types of options where you don't necessarily need huge participation from the national government, but where the issue is you want to bring in electrification through what I would call self-help. So people who will go purchase a solar lantern, who will go put up a solar panel on their roof, and in that way, they are able to meet their level of requirements, which, as Bruno from IEA explained earlier, there are different tiers to it. But in these tiers, you can, depending on your level of affordability, you can go and get some of these devices, and that helps you get electrified and meet the needs for electricity that you have. Of course, over time, those needs will increase. Hopefully, there is also an economic growth, so there is more affordability. But the current challenges we face is that the levels of affordability are low, and basically the needs for electricity per household are still fairly limited to lighting in some cases and potentially charging of your cell phones and so forth. So what this particular slide is showing you is the type of questions and things that we can ask in household surveys, which are part of, for example, the multi-tier framework, which goes beyond just saying, do you have access or do you not have access, but rather talk about the type of access, the quality of access, the needs that they have currently, and potentially even what they can afford to pay per month or what their current costs are per month, whether it is an oil lamp that they are using or whether it is a solar lantern. So these type of surveys, I would want you to think of them in the same way as you would think of a know your customer kind of survey that you may have in other, non-energy areas. And increasingly, this is going to become more and more important to know your customers well, particularly as you try to push for those types of solutions that are not just a grid extension, but rather where there are choices and options available to the end consumer and the customer, and they go and pick among those choices. I think what is on this slide I have already covered because we've talked about the data and the irregularity of data. So let me skip through this because what we are trying to say is that these gaps in information we have to fill in through the type of surveys that we talked about and through the type of satellite data, etc. Now, when we did this last year for the SDG exercise, what we came to the conclusion was that if you look at the access gap in Africa, or I would, to be more precise, say sub-Saharan Africa, we are basically looking at roughly 50% of it to be covered by the grid and grid extensions. But another 50% of it, roughly, will be covered by off-grid and then mini-grids. And mini-grids is a smaller portion, but the bulk of it, something like, I would say, 45% odd of the gap, we think would be covered by not grid extension, but by off-grid solutions. So that is why off-grid solutions are a very important part, and developing the type of know your customer data, as well as customer awareness, as well as developing the ecosystem where private players, local entrepreneurs can come in and offer more and more quality options becomes very important. This is again something that I spoke to and alluded to, but basically it shows how predominant the access gap is with respect to Africa. And the countries that we are talking about, which are the top electricity access deficit countries, you can see most of them fall within Africa. And that basically also gives us the figures as to what we are projecting at current pace. We will still, not be achieving in terms of the SDG 7 universal access goal, unless we really change strategies, apply more nimble modern techniques, and try to reach out to those countries that currently may not be able to have grid extensions. At this point, if I can request my colleague, Patrick, are you able to come in?
Yes.
Okay, Patrick, if you can take over from slides here, I will continue to change the slides at your request, but it would be useful for you to walk the people through these remaining slides, and I'll come in as needed.
Thank you,
Over
Sandeep.
to you, Patrick.
During our last year SDG7 report, when we calculating the electricity access using those aforementioned by Sandeep source of data, we came up with these figures where globally almost over 680 million people have show that they don't have access to electricity, and the margin share of the majority was in sub-Saharan Africa, where 83% of them were in sub-Saharan Africa, but some region like Central Asia really managed to close the access gap. So it was not 100%, but at least they managed to reduce this gap. And then it shows, and the figure which is down, the next figure shows also that this access to electricity was actually show that the annual increase in population and annual increase in access, especially sub-Saharan Africa, for sub-Saharan Africa to reach the universal access, it shows that it needs like more than the doubling the effort so that they can have access from 30 million to 60 million, which really is one of, yes, please.
Yeah, if I can come in, just to put it very bluntly, what we're saying is that currently there are, roughly speaking, 30 million connections that are being added in sub-Saharan Africa annually. But the population increase in sub-Saharan Africa is also around the 28 to 29 million annually. So in a sense, the reason why you have this concentration of the electricity gap in Africa is that we are, in a sense, not being able to beat the increase in population. So we absolutely have to double the rate at which we are adding connections in sub-Saharan Africa for us to move forward on that. So that's, I think, the key point here. Over back to you, Patrick.
Thank you, Sandeep. So as a way forward, the World Bank would like to enter into different collaboration, like for instance, this one we are doing with Africa. So would like to go into different collaboration with different various users of energy service providers. Another one is in order to address the issue of data quality. We have this initiative with the LSMS teams to design and analyze the MTF surveys to obtain better data insight. Will actually answer the issue of these binary answers or regarding to electricity access. Another one, the World Bank is also working with the different on different program to design better policies and programs to address this kind of data gaps in, let's say, from a medium to long term a solution. Another point that we are working on, of course, is it's working with different institutions, for instance, like IEA, as well as, for instance, even Africa and others, in order to identify specific areas for improvement through different webinars like this one. And then we see how we can improve all these measures that we're going to put in place in the near future. I think this is it. Unless Sandeep, you
let me just supplement a little bit. So basically, this last slide that we have, which is on the way forward, the overarching theme here is collaboration. It is collaboration with partners like IEA, WHO, IRENA, and of course the United Nations Statistical Department, as we try to improve quality of data. It is collaboration or increasing collaboration with the NSOs, the National Statistical Offices, so that we not only sort of get on ground fresh data, but we also work with them to improve capacity for collecting that data and a framework which then helps also improve the quality of the data. So these are sort of some of our efforts, but they're also partly a wish list. And we want to reach out to you, Africa, as a follow-on to this workshop, that we want to meet with more people in the NSOs. We want to deepen the collaboration that we can have in that respect. And then overlaying that, the other collaboration here that I think is worthy of mention is that we want to see this as a cross-sectoral approach. So as we talk about knowing your customer, what we are talking about here is knowing what can that customer afford. What does the customer currently need? Is it only lighting, or is it lighting and a television? Is it lighting and phone charging? And so on and so forth. And be able to categorize that in a particular manner. And then we would like to see how we can partner with yourselves at Africa to see how we develop more and more an ecosystem on the ground of entrepreneurs and of awareness of the different options that are available in the off-grid space, as well as see what is a least cost option, what is a more expensive option, as we look to closing the gap and meeting the targets that we have of universal access to electricity. So let me stop. The one last thing, obviously, it's well known, but worth mentioning is that the World Bank is pushing hard with its Mission 300 initiative, and that is to electrify 300 million people in sub-Saharan Africa over the next 5 years. So this is a very, very ambitious goal. We are doing this, of course, in partnership with the African Development Bank, and we've got other partners that we would also like to bring in. But bottom line is, this is very ambitious, and it requires a lot of help and support from all of the people on the ground there. And AFRIC, in our view, would be a great agency to look toward in this respect. Let me stop here and turn it back to you, Samson, and also thank my colleague, Patrick, for his participation. Over to you, Samson.
Thank you very much, Sandy, for this very wonderful presentation. That I know my director is in recall. Maybe also he can come in at any time. But I don't know this statement from your end. I don't know if as working for African continent, maybe we can be scared when we say that with all those efforts now, we're not able to achieve the universal access to electricity by 2030 if we didn't double the current efforts. I think this is a very good statement, and then we need to make sure that we give very good statistics to our policymakers. Say, okay, look, with these 300 million people, 300 million projects, are we going to achieve that universal access to electricity in sub-Saharan Africa? This is a big question mark. And I think we have to mention clearly, we are ready to cooperate with you, and then we can have a follow-up call after this webinar and see how we can cooperate. So, and then also, I think there is already a lot of questions in chat for you because people want to know more about all what you present now. I think maybe you or Patrick can address, and then also there are still a lot of questions for EIA, Bruno, and also to Africa. My colleague Bati also can try to act. I don't know if my director wants to say something before we proceed to country. And then also to finish, I think Africa, we are work closely with the Ministry of Energy as well as the National Bureau of Statistics. So there is nothing wrong if we want to have this good connection with the National Bureau of Statistics from all the AU member states. We can gather them for another discussion at any time. We can plan for that. So, Director, I don't know if you want to come in to say something. Please, over to you, Director.
Yes, thank you very much, Samson, and thank you thanks for all presenter who bring really a very good perspective on this very complicated area, but also it is very important. And I think what I can take away from this discussion is a collaboration, because this task is very complicated, and you need all people to come together and work together so that we can have a clear or high quality data on electricity access, but also other indicators that we needed to provide to our policymaker to have informed decision. From Africa side, I think we have focal points, at least 5 focal points in each Ministry of Energy. We are working with all our member states. We are providing capacity building. We have questionnaires we are filling every year from our member state, and we are welcoming all the World Bank, EIA, or all other institutions that are willing to advance the effort on this area. And we are stand ready to collaborate so that we can have at the end good data for everyone, for World Bank, for investor, for EIA, for everyone. I think this what I can highlight it now. Thank you very much, Samson.
Okay, thank you very much, Director. So let me give the floor to my colleague, Bati. Bati, are you ready for a presentation?
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Bande Bati. I'm Senior Policy Officer at AFREC. I'm going to present the importance of measuring electricity access in Africa. The presentation is in English, but I'm going to speak French. Thank you. Okay. Donc, j'ai le plaisir et l'honneur de présenter de la part de l'AFREC l'importance et la nécessité de mesurer l'accès à l'électricité en Afrique. Alors, ce thème d'accès à l'électricité vient après que l'Afrique ait fait un certain nombre de webinaires concernant l'accès à la cuisson propre. Donc, l'accès à l'électricité se présente donc comme une deuxième thématique vraiment très, très chère à l'Afrique, où étant donné que l'Afrique est en train d'améliorer la qualité des données, de la collecte des données et d'étendre les données habituellement collectées qui se limitent au bilan énergétique, donc à d'autres sources de données. Donc, aujourd'hui, l'accès à l'électricité est une thématique très importante que l'Afrique prend à bras le corps. Ma présentation va tourner autour d'un certain nombre de points. Donc, nous allons faire une introduction et faire un passage de revue des technologies d'accès à l'électricité que nous retrouvons en Afrique. Ensuite, nous répondre à la question de savoir pourquoi il est important de mesurer le taux d'accès. Nous allons parler de l'indicateurs clés de mesure et comment cela se fait et les sources de données collectées. Et nous allons voir enfin les défis liés à la mesure de l'accès à l'électricité. Et pour conclure, nous allons faire un certain nombre de recommandations et une brève conclusion pour finir cette présentation. Comme nous pouvons le savoir, l'électricité est un élément fondamental dans le secteur, donc quand on parle de développement, dans toutes les actions qui sont mises en œuvre pour booster l'économie dans un pays. Donc, l'électricité se présente donc l'élément moteur pour booster les questions de développement. Et donc, un certain nombre de points, de raisons nous amènent à souligner l'importance de l'accès à l'électricité en Afrique, notamment le développement économique à travers l'industrialisation, la transformation des matières premières sur place. Et cela permet aussi la création d'emplois et autres, donc, et de booster le bien-être et le niveau de vie des populations. Donc, l'électricité est un moteur très important dans ce cas. Ensuite, en matière d'éducation et de formation, il est très important d'avoir de l'électricité parce que les localités, des études qui ont été menées sur des localités, le niveau de l'éducation au niveau des localités qui n'avaient pas accès à l'électricité et qui en ont eu après, a montré un bond spectaculaire de la performance des apprenants en matière de résultats. Et donc, en plus de cela, même que ce soit en milieu urbain où l'électricité est souvent disponible, l'utilisation des équipements au niveau des études et aussi de l'Internet, du numérique dans la recherche, tout cela a besoin de l'accès à l'électricité. Dans le domaine de la santé, il est très important, ce n'est plus à démontrer que l'électricité est un élément central dans les centres de santé, d'abord pour l'utilisation des équipements, et surtout en milieu rural où ils font face à des difficultés de conservation des médicaments et des vaccins. Donc, l'accès à l'électricité devient une solution très importante pour booster ou permettre le bien-être des populations. Nous avons aussi l'adduction d'eau potable dans les milieux reculés où on voit clairement que le manque d'électricité impacte sérieusement sur l'adduction d'eau potable et aussi les infrastructures d'assainissement. Et enfin, nous n'allons pas oublier le point de la transition énergétique. Quand on sait que l'exploitation des énergies renouvelables qui sont vraiment disponibles en grande quantité en Afrique sont utilisées dans les programmes d'accès à l'électricité afin d'avoir un développement durable et de lutter contre les changements climatiques. Alors, cependant, une mesure précise du taux d'accès à l'électricité est nécessaire pour orienter les politiques publiques et attirer les investissements en infrastructure. Nous en voulons pour preuve que les objectifs des ODD 7, donc, qui visent un accès universel donc, à l'accès aux services énergétiques fiables, durables, modernes et abordables, à un coût abordable. Donc, il s'agit plus précisément d'un accès universel à l'électricité et à des moyens de cuisson, de multiplier par 2 le taux d'amélioration de l'efficacité énergétique et d'accroître nettement la part des énergies renouvelables dans le bouquet énergétique mondial. Et donc, lorsque nous faisons référence au rapport de suivi du de l'ODD 7, le rapport qui a dénommé Tracking SDG 7. Donc, 685 millions de personnes dans le monde n'ont toujours pas accès à l'électricité en 2022 et soit 10 millions de plus qu'en 2021. Et sur ce nombre-là, 570 millions se retrouvent en Afrique subsaharienne qui concentre plus de 80% de la population mondiale sans électricité. C'est cela qui attire l'attention donc de l'Afrique pour faire un travail de fond et permettre donc d'améliorer l'accès à l'électricité en Afrique. Alors, quels sont les types d'accès ou bien les types de technologies pour l'accès à l'électricité que nous avons en Afrique? Généralement, nous avons d'abord le réseau principal, donc, qui est un réseau de postes et de sous-stations électriques, ainsi que des lignes de distribution qui relient les producteurs aux consommateurs. Et à côté de cela, nous avons des mini-grids ou bien des mini-réseaux qui sont des petits réseaux électriques composés d'une ou plusieurs unités de production et des lignes de distribution, souvent non raccordées au réseau principal, mais qui permettent de desservir les foyers et les consommateurs. Et enfin, nous avons les systèmes autonomes, qui sont des dispositifs de production d'électricité qui alimentent les foyers de façon individuelle. Et généralement, c'est ce que nous appelons les kits. Et au niveau du solaire, nous entendons souvent parler des kits solaires. La question fondamentale auquel nous allons répondre est de savoir pourquoi mesurer l'accès à l'électricité. Nous avions vu tantôt l'importance ou bien le rôle que joue l'électricité dans le développement en Afrique. Et là, nous pouvons donc relever un certain nombre de points qui vont nous motiver ou bien motiver les gouvernants pour mettre les moyens afin de mesurer le taux d'accès à l'électricité. D'abord, l'évaluation du développement socio-économique. Donc, le calcul ou bien la mesure du taux d'accès permet d'identifier les écarts entre les zones urbaines et rurales et d'orienter les politiques publiques. Parce que nous savons très bien que l'électricité, nous venons de le dire, a un impact sur l'éducation, la santé, l'industrialisation et l'amélioration du niveau de vie. Il est très important que les gouvernants ou bien les décideurs aient les informations nécessaires pour savoir comment orienter leur politique. Ensuite, il y a le suivi des objectifs de développement durable édictés par les Nations Unies. Donc, la mesure du taux d'accès va permettre de vraiment suivre ces activités-là, et ces objectifs-là, pardon, et d'ajuster donc les stratégies à mettre en œuvre pour l'atteinte des ODD. Une troisième position, il y a l'optimisation des investissements et les infrastructures. Donc, les gouvernants et les entreprises, nous le savons tous, avant de planifier un quelconque investissement dans une localité, ont besoin d'avoir des données fiables. Et l'accès à l'électricité est un élément essentiel pour permettre à un entrepreneur ou même à un gouvernant, à un décideur de prendre une décision d'investissement dans une localité donnée. L'autre point important, c'est la réduction de la pauvreté énergétique. Aujourd'hui, la pauvreté énergétique est un concept qui de plus en plus prend de l'ampleur et cela pourra être dans les prochains mois un des thématiques que nous allons étudier lors d'un webinaire. Et donc, nous allons décortiquer la question de la pauvreté énergétique. Et donc, cette pauvreté énergétique qui entraîne des inégalités fait que la mesure du taux d'accès doit permettre d'identifier les zones vulnérables afin de pouvoir adapter les solutions. Parce que quand on sait très bien qu'aujourd'hui, beaucoup de ménages en Afrique dépendent toujours du bois et du bois de feu, du charbon de bois et du bois de feu, qui sont des sources d'énergie polluantes. Nous avons également la transition énergétique, dont nous avons tantôt parlé des énergies renouvelables. Et l'Afrique, dispose d'un fort potentiel en énergie renouvelable. Et donc, beaucoup de politiques vont vers ces énergies. Et donc, la mesure du taux d'accès va nous permettre d'identifier quelle est la part des énergies renouvelables par rapport aux énergies fossiles dans les projets d'accès à l'électricité en Afrique. Enfin, l'attraction des investisseurs pour stimuler l'économie. Donc, tous les programmes, toutes les institutions internationales qui ont des projets, des programmes d'aider les pays à augmenter leur taux d'accès ont besoin d'informations fiables. Et donc, voilà quelques raisons pour lesquelles nous pensons à l'Afrique qu'il faut mesurer le taux d'accès ou bien l'accès à l'électricité. Alors, quel est l'indicateur principal qui permet de mesurer l'accès? C'est le taux d'accès à l'électricité, qui est la part ou bien le pourcentage de la population qui a accès à l'électricité. Ici, une question fondamentale se pose. Qui appelle-t-on population ayant accès à l'électricité? Qui est celui-là qui a accès à l'électricité? Et donc, lorsqu'on pourra répondre à cette question, on pourra vraiment déterminer un taux d'accès à l'électricité que nous allons considérer comme fiable. Et donc, c'est très important de mener une réflexion, nous allons le voir vers la fin de cette présentation, de mener une réflexion pour voir qu'est-ce qu'il y a à faire pour permettre d'avoir un taux d'accès fiable. Bon, le taux principal étant, ou bien l'indicateur principal étant le taux d'accès, il est aussi important d'adjoindre à cela un certain nombre d'indicateurs tels que la qualité et la fiabilité du service. Il ne suffit pas d'amener l'électricité dans une localité et que des gens aient des coupures à longueur de journée. Et donc, le nombre de coupures et leur durée sont un indicateur de fiabilité qui permet de mesurer l'accès véritable à l'électricité. Nous avons également le coût accessible ou bien le coût auquel les populations peuvent payer l'électricité parce que c'est un élément très fondamental. On a vu des localités électrifiées, mais un très faible taux d'accès ou bien d'abonnement au réseau. Et donc, c'est très important qu'une étude importante soit faite pour qu'une fois que l'électricité soit là, que le tarif aussi auquel on vend l'électricité puisse être abordable aux populations. Donc, c'est un indicateur que nous devons mesurer pour apprécier la capacité des populations ou des ménages à faire face donc, au coût de l'électricité qui leur est donné. Nous avons également les sources d'énergie. Il est très important donc, de mesurer quelle est la part donc, des énergies renouvelables au niveau des programmes d'accès à l'électricité. Donc, ici, nous voyons donc la formule du taux d'accès, qui est la population ayant accès à l'électricité sur la population totale. Donc, je le disais tantôt, je ne veux pas aller en profondeur, c'est la formule générale, mais maintenant, c'est celui qui a accès à l'électricité. C'est une réflexion à mener et qui va se faire aussi au niveau des pays, parce que chaque pays a sa réalité et doit pouvoir définir en tout cas, qui définit souvent qui est appelé comme personne ayant accès à l'électricité. Maintenant, au niveau de l'Afrique, il y aura un travail de fond qui va se faire pour offrir ou bien donner à tous les pays les éléments nécessaires pour apprécier ce qu'on appelle l'accès à l'électricité. Cela permet d'harmoniser les taux et que ces taux qui seront communiqués à l'Afrique puissent être considérés comme des taux fiables. Ces informations dont nous avons besoin pour calculer le taux ont un certain nombre de sources et dans les pays, cela va d'un pays à l'autre. Donc, il y a d'abord les sociétés de distribution, les compagnies de distribution d'électricité qui ont souvent les informations nécessaires pour calculer l'accès à l'électricité. Nous avons les régulateurs qui sont souvent les autorités chargées de réguler le secteur et qui donnent les licences aux opérateurs, aux différents opérateurs dans les pays qui disposent énormément de données et d'informations qui peuvent permettre de calculer les taux. Nous avons les mini-grids, donc, qui sont souvent réalisés par des opérateurs indépendants, des opérateurs qui vendent l'électricité, donc qui peuvent fournir les informations nécessaires au calcul de ce taux, de même que les compagnies de distribution des systèmes autonomes, donc des kits dans surtout en milieu rural. Et enfin, nous avons aussi les programmes qui sont conduits au niveau des ministères pour encourager donc les off-grid, les mini-réseaux hors réseau pour permettre l'accès des populations à l'électricité. Nous allons maintenant parler des défis auxquels les pays sont confrontés lorsque ils sont amenés à calculer le taux d'électricité. L'Afrique est actuellement en train de faire un travail de fond pour élaborer le rapport SDG 7 des ODD 7 pour l'Afrique. Et nous avons rencontré beaucoup de difficultés dans la collecte de données. Et donc, nous avons pu identifier les défis que nous avons à relever pardon, au niveau des différents pays. Donc, d'abord, le manque de données précises, surtout pour les milieux, en milieu rural. Donc, il y a une difficulté énorme pour avoir les informations. Donc, les pays rencontrent ces genres de difficultés qui sont liées à la mise en place des systèmes d'information, des systèmes robustes d'information pour pouvoir collecter ces informations-là. C'est ce qui fait défaut au niveau des pays. Nous avons les disparités régionales, que ce soit entre pays ou bien au niveau d'un pays, les disparités entre milieu urbain et milieu rural, et la fiabilité des infrastructures aussi qui ne permettent pas d'assurer un suivi en temps réel. Alors, à cela, d'autres problèmes viennent se greffer, à savoir les connexions informelles, c'est-à-dire des connexions des ménages qui relèvent carrément de la fraude. Donc, il y a des ménages qui sont connectés au réseau de façon irrégulière et qui se disent ayant accès à l'électricité, mais en fait, qui ne sont pas comptabilisés dans le calcul du taux qui se fait à partir du nombre d'abonnés. Vous allez souvent constater cela lorsque, dans les pays, il y a une grande ou bien une énorme différence entre les taux que les instituts nationaux de statistiques présentent et les taux calculés par les ministères. Et cela vient du fait que au niveau des instituts de statistiques, lorsqu'ils font leurs enquêtes, il suffit juste de poser une question aux ménages pour savoir est-ce que vous avez accès à l'électricité? Et les ménages répondent souvent par oui, ils l'ont, mais ne diront jamais comment ils l'ont. Parce que des ménages l'ont de façon frauduleuse. Ou bien ils ont juste tiré le câble à partir d'une autre maison qui a accès à l'électricité. Et donc, vous allez souvent voir qu'au niveau des instituts nationaux de statistiques, les taux sont très élevés, alors que quand les ministères calculent, ces personnes-là ne sont pas prises en compte. Nous avons les sous-comptages. Donc, dans certains pays où plusieurs clients partagent un même raccordement, et donc je l'évoquais tantôt, donc qui crée aussi des difficultés dans la mesure donc, du taux et d'avoir vraiment, qui écorche vraiment la fiabilité du taux. Nous avons également les alimentations de secours. Donc, certaines personnes qui ont des réseaux, qui sont connectés au réseau et qui en même temps ont leur propre système de production d'électricité et qui peuvent être doublement comptés si on ne fait pas attention à cela. Donc, les doubles comptages qui sont issus d'un mini-réseau ou bien du réseau principal parce que peut-être une localité avait déjà un mini-réseau et après a été raccordée au réseau national. Et quand on ne fait pas attention, ça peut amener à faire des doubles comptages. Et donc, tous ces points-là sont des défis à relever au niveau des pays pour assurer la fiabilité des données qui sont collectées pour le calcul du taux d'accès. Nous avons donc, au niveau de l'Afrique, un certain nombre de recommandations qui est d'abord, en premier lieu, l'harmonisation des méthodologies ou bien des méthodes de mesure ou bien de calcul de l'accès à l'électricité. Cela est très important et c'est un travail que l'Afrique va faire tout juste après ce webinaire que nous allons lancer pour avoir un document d'harmonisation d'abord qui on appelle personnes ayant ou bien ménages ayant accès à l'électricité Et une fois que cela est fait, comment le taux doit être calculé en fonction des spécificités de chaque pays. Donc, cela permettra donc au pays d'avoir vraiment sous la main un document essentiel et une méthodologie de calcul du taux qui pourra vraiment permettre à l'Afrique d'être sûr que les données que nous collectons au niveau de chaque pays peuvent être considérées comme fiables. Ensuite, l'Afrique veut mettre en place une base de données vraiment bien fournie pour le calcul du taux d'accès. Donc, une fois que le travail d'harmonisation est fait, une base de données sera mise en place pour permettre à tous les pays de pouvoir transmettre les données sur le taux d'accès en temps réel. Il y a aussi des activités qui vont être initiées pour le partage d'expériences entre les différents pays. Il y a des pays qui ont un certain nombre ou bien les mêmes réalités et ils peuvent à partir des expériences d'un pays, l'autre pourra s'inspirer pour mettre en place ces infrastructures de mesure, de calcul du taux d'accès à l'électricité. Et aussi inciter les pays à avoir des politiques énergétiques adaptées et à partir du déploiement des solutions adaptées aux besoins locaux. En conclusion, nous pouvons dire que l'accès à l'électricité est crucial pour la mesure du développement en Afrique. C'est un levier essentiel pour le développement en Afrique de par son impact sur l'économie, l'éducation, la santé, la transition énergétique et tous les points que nous avons vus plus haut. Ensuite, la collecte de données et une analyse précise des données sont nécessaires pour des politiques efficaces. Et enfin, les pays africains ont besoin d'innover, ont besoin d'introduire l'innovation dans l'amélioration des mesures du taux d'accès. Ceci pourra assurer donc la fiabilité des données. Voilà les points de réflexion que l'Afrique a à partager avec nous. Merci.
Okay, thank you very much, Nati. I think he shared very well, very good and a good experience of Africa so far on measurement access to electricity. And then I think one of the main outcome is that very soon Africa will develop and publish a handbook on measurement or access to electricity in Africa. Of course, we will work with our colleague from IEA as well as the World Bank. I think now we'll hear from country. And then the first country is Kenya. So Ramon, please, the floor is yours. Please proceed.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Director Abdallah, Samson, and the entire AFRIC team for this opportunity to share the Kenya experience on access to electricity and enhancing the same. My name is Raymond Se. I'm a senior energy planner with Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Authority in Kenya, EPRA, and EPRA is the single sector utility regulator for the entire electricity supply chain, and not just electricity, but all other forms of energy, oil, gas, and renewable energy as well. So in my presentation today, I'll basically be briefly touching on country overview in terms of macroeconomic performance and electricity statistics. And we'll dive into the access in Kenya, how we define access, where are we in terms of access, and probably talk briefly about the data collection that we employ in determining access. Also, it will also look briefly at our journey towards achieving universal access to electricity. As a country, of course, we have set the target of 2030. So our journey to universal access has been threefold in terms of legislative policy reviews, in terms of improving operational planning and regulatory frameworks, as well as implementing very key national, bilateral, and multilateral programs that support enhancements of electricity access in Kenya. So in conclusion, I'll also briefly talk about the strategies that we're currently implementing as well in achieving electricity access. So overview, as a country, Kenya is actually located in the East African side of Africa. For those who do not know, it has an estimated population of about 51 million. Macroeconomically, we perform quite dominantly in the region, the GDP at about $107 billion US. And of course, our annual growth has been at 5.6 for the last year. And our
Sorry, Ramon, can you get closer to the mic? Because we are not hearing properly.
Oh, you cannot hear me properly?
Yeah, now in that position is clear. So get closer.
Sorry.
Okay.
All right. So as I was saying, Kenya is predominantly located in the East African region with a population of 51 million. This is for those who do not know where Kenya is. Our GDP performance, of course, is at $107 billion USD, and capita income is at $1,950 US. Our system of administration is decentralized. We have the national government administration that largely looks at trade, foreign policy, energy security and supply at macro level. And then we have the decentralized government, which comprises of 47 counties. They look at, among others, energy access, health, and education, but at county level. So in my next slide, I'll be looking at the electricity sector statistics. As a country, of course, in the region, we are leading with about 3.2 gigawatts of installed power capacity. But the key information about Kenya is that we are a leader in renewable energy, as everybody is aware, and about 76% of our installed capacity is actually from renewable energy, and 90% of that, of our daily dispatch, is actually renewable energy, geothermal taking a very much lead in that. Our peak demand, of course, is currently relatively low as to what we wish to aspire, and is currently sitting at 2.3 gigawatts. So on my next slide, we are looking at transmission, which has been very integral enhancing electricity access. Of course, over the last year, we have improved quite largely with our transmission interconnectors. As you can see there, the numbers currently are over 300,000 kilometers, and this is greatly enhances electricity access within the country. In terms of connection, these are actually the grid connections. So for the 2024 electricity, we're actually sitting at 9.7. This, keep in mind, we are coming from 2013, where our connections were at less than 2.3 million. Basically, access was at less than 20%. So this extensive and aggressive growth has largely been supported by the deliberate reforms the government has put in place, including legislative, policy, and regulatory, as well as support from multilateral and bilateral organizations that continues to see us attaining towards universal access in 2030, but currently sitting at about 75% in terms of access rate. So between 2014 and 2017, it will be worth noting that we were averaging almost 1.1 million grid connections per year, again, as a result of the aggressive push by the government to ensure that each and everybody has access to electricity. So Kenya as a country, how do we basically define electricity access? This is based on the MTF framework, which Sandeep has already talked about. The MTF framework, of course, looks beyond connectivity at just grid and on-grid. It looks at capacity, it looks at reliability, it looks at affordability, which are very key, especially in enhancing access in any jurisdiction globally. So the tiers are from tier 0 all the way to 5. As a country, we aspire to achieve tier 5, which is 24 hours of uninterrupted electricity and full productive use and industrial access at the same. So currently, we are aggressively pursuing tier 2s and 3s. So you look at tier 2 and 3, we have about 1.3 million connections. This is in small home solar systems as well as mini-grid connections. Kenya, of course, as well has been at the forefront in implementing mini-grid regulations and mini-grid development in the far-flung areas where off-grid connections have been deemed not feasible. Now, in terms of our grid connections, which is in tier 4, we have about 9.4 million on-grid connections countrywide currently, and this number is expanding rapidly every day. This is, again, of course, as a result of the deliberate and aggressive push by the Kenyan government to ensure that there's 100% universal access to electricity. How we measure access basically is in terms of households, and this data is twofold. It's actually collected by a household survey by the National Bureau of Statistics, KNBS, as well as getting the secondary data in terms of number of connections from our utilities, that is the off-grid developers, as well as the on-grid off-takers, utility companies. So out of 13.5 million households, we have about 9.7 households that are connected and about 3.7 not connected. So this is roughly estimating our connection at about 75%. So given the fact that our KNBS projections put us at 15 million by the year 2030, which is our target year for universal access, with annual growth of 1.47 million households every year, we're supposed to connect up to 5.2 million by the year at 2030, which is our target year for universal access to electricity. So briefly, like I said earlier, I'd like to talk about our journey to electricity access and universal access to the same. Firstly, we're looking at the various legislative reforms that we have done that has really supported enhancement of electricity access in this country. Before 1997, electricity was largely on grid, and at this point, any form of grid extension was, if it was deemed not commercially viable, then it was not sustainable and it was abandoned. However, with reforms from 97, 2006, and all the way to 2019, and in particular in 2006, where now the entire sector was unbundled and we had generation, transmission and distribution, and all being different players, this formed the basis for now an aggressive expansion. But it is in 2019 that the need to actually put access at the forefront was established and incorporated into law. Currently, we are supposed to implement the Integrated National Energy Plan, which looks at energy access as a component on its own. This, of course, provides an opportunity for even Kenya to achieve universal access by 2030, given that this particular Integrated National Energy Plan is supposed to come into play within the next 2-3 years, that will set strategies, further strategies on how best we are going to achieve that particular universal access. Additionally, we have also made reforms in operational planning frameworks as well as regulatory frameworks in trying to achieve electricity access. Traditionally, as a country, we have planned through the Least Cost Power Development Plan, which has also provided least cost investment options for grid expansion and grid extension. And this has always been translated to the National Electrification Strategy and how we can basically utilize the recommendation of the Least Cost Power Development Plan into grid extensions and intensifications and densifications programs. This, of course, like I mentioned earlier on the previous slide, also translates into the Integrated National Energy Plan. So the INA plan looks at electricity, energy access, as previously mentioned, as separate themes. So these various reforms within our operational plan puts energy access, electricity access at the forefront of our government agenda. In terms of regulatory frameworks, as a regulator, of course, affordability is key to the supply side of electricity. And we have always implemented a cross-subsidy mechanism to ensure even the low cadre population is able to afford electricity once it is supplied. We have also trying to implement mini-grid regulations, which also shall provide an operational and regulatory framework for all mini-grid developers within the country as when they want to put up mini-grids. And in the event the grid comes into contact with the mini-grids, it also sets the guidelines on how the two shall merge and interact. Of course, we also push for grid code compliance. This basically means that whether it's a solar home system, whether it's a mini-grid, whether it's a grid connection, it has to be compliant with the grid code. This basically provides an opportunity for harmonization and alignment of all our system. Of course, lastly, on the journey to universal access, we are looking at the various national, bilateral, and multilateral programs. This, I must admit, World Bank has played a major role in this. Most of the programs listed here, the Kenya Electrification Modernization Project, Kenya Electrification Expansion Project, the Last Mile Connectivity Project, as well as the Kenya Off-Grid Solar Access Project have largely been financed by the World Bank towards our aspirations and projects in achieving universal access to electricity. So the KEMP, the Kenya Electricity Modernization Project, basically has been looking at strengthening our power distribution grid. This includes reinforcements, new and reinforcements of our transformers and distribution substations. This has been driven by the fact that our load over the years continues to grow, but we realize that our network is still old. So the reinvestment in the infrastructure has really gratefully helped in achieving universal access to that effect. The Kenya Electricity Expansion Project, on the other one, this one has been looking at the wider transmission network, of course, in terms of power evacuation from generation to the load center. Additionally, of course, we have, as a country, we have progressively integrated large number of variable energies into our system, and this has called an investment and reinvestment into our transmission network. The Kenya Electrification Expansion Project has gratefully has rightfully helped in ensuring that we have a sustainable transmission network. The Last Mile Connectivity Project, this one is an ongoing connecting program, which basically looks at subsidizing the cost of connectivity to improve access in the country. And of course, of note, wish to note to the audience is the Rural Electrification Program. This was a national program that was actually established in 1973. It was actually the first of its kind in the country. This was aimed at improving access in the far-flung areas of the rural areas of this country. This particular program is fully funded by the national government. However, the levy is imposed on electricity consumed annually. So in conclusion, I basically want to talk about the strategies that we are currently implementing to ensure that we achieve universal access to electricity by the year 2030. And of course, this comes from the national electrification strategies, which present an investment roadmap as well as achieving universal. It is threefold. It basically talks on grid extensions, grid densifications, and mini grids. So there is harmonization of the three strategies outlined with our national budgeting process, as well as seeking support from bilateral and multilateral financials to ensure that access is achieved within the target period and through those particular strategies. There's also the investment and integration of RE. We continue to develop our renewable energy into the system. And this, we are benefiting largely the investment benefits from a favorable fiscal environment. There are task policies that basically freeze or zero rate task on products of solar home systems, sort of plant operating units that contribute to renewable energy generation. And this, of course, ultimately results into a relatively lower levelized cost of electricity associated with renewable energy, which speaks into the affordability of electricity at a wider scope. We are also continuously developing mini grids towards, of course, we are trying to operationalize our mini grids regulations, which basically look at an aggressive and development of mini grids, especially in areas that are not covered by the grid currently. And of course, one of the biggest impediments towards enhancing electricity access is in the finance aspect of it, as everybody will agree that electricity and energy by far is a really capital intensive sector. So with this regards, in terms of mobilizing resources to ensure that our infrastructure is developed fully, the government is currently exploring PPP, public-private partnership avenues, to ensure that, in as much as we want to achieve universal access, we must have the right infrastructure, the right network to achieve it. So PPP is an avenue that is being looked at as a resource mobilization to ensure we get this. Will, of course, will be guided by value for money and cost-benefit analysis principles. This all speaks to universal access to electricity and the various strategies that we're trying to approach and execute. Samson, I think that's my presentation for now. I'll take any questions after this.
Thank you very much, Raymond. So I think I already identified 4 or 5 questions in chat for you from Lilith and then also from Akram. They want to know more about your presentation. So maybe feel free to go to the chat and then try to answer the question. So we are very happy that Kenya is doing well to make sure that you reach the universal access to electricity by 2030. I think indeed that's a very good news. So please proceed with chat and so that you can try to address some of the questions. Thank you very much, Raymond. So please stop sharing. Then now the last speaker from the day from Benin. So please, Benin, please you have a floor. So I think from Benin will speak the French. So there is interpretation in English. So those who cannot speak French, cannot hear French, please just select the interpretation in English and then you can hear participants. Thank you. Over.
D'accord, merci, Monsieur Samson. Bonsoir, bonjour et bonsoir, chers participants à ce webinaire. Moi, c'est Pascal Sourion-Degbeyon. Je suis en charge des études et de la planification au ministère de l'Énergie, de l'Eau et des Mines. Je vais partager avec vous l'expérience du Bénin en matière de mesure de l'accès à l'électricité. Pour cette présentation, nous allons suivre 6 points. Dans un premier temps, nous allons aborder le cadre réglementaire, ensuite le cadre institutionnel. Nous allons aborder rapidement le processus de mise à jour des données et d'accès à l'électricité. Ensuite, nous allons présenter les indicateurs de mesure, les 4 indicateurs que nous utilisons au Bénin, et les méthodologies et les sources de données, quelques résultats d'indicateurs et ensuite les défis. Pour le premier point, concernant le cadre réglementaire, il y a eu plusieurs décisions, lois, arrêtés qui ont été élaborés depuis 1999, qui permettent au ministère en charge de l'énergie d'élaborer régulièrement les statistiques énergétiques. La première décision a été prise en 1999. Et à la suite de ça, nous avons une note de service qui a mis en place le comité technique en charge de la validation et des indicateurs en général. Il y a un autre arrêté qui a mis en place une équipe technique pour gérer la plateforme CINEB. Il y a le cadre réglementaire qui fixe non, je voulais parler du cadre juridique et institutionnel pour la mise en œuvre de la stratégie nationale d'électrification. Il y a la loi 2022-07 du 2 juin portant organisation et réglementation des activités statistiques en République du Bénin. Et enfin, nous avons un décret portant réglementation de l'électrification hors réseau. Abordant le cadre institutionnel, bon, au niveau du ministère de l'Énergie, il y a la Direction générale de la planification énergétique et de l'électrification rurale qui s'occupe de tout ce qui est statistique énergétique. En plus de ça, il y a les institutions que j'ai encadrées en rouge là. Il y a la Société béninoise de l'énergie électrique qui s'occupe de la distribution, qui est acteur quand nous voulons parler de l'accès à l'électricité. Il y a l'Institut national en charge de la statistique aussi. En dehors de ça, nous avons les opérateurs privés de distribution, nous avons les organisations professionnelles qui interviennent dans la plupart dans l'accès à l'électricité via les kits solaires. Pour le processus de mise à jour des données à l'accès à l'électricité, bon, dans un premier temps, il y a l'identification des sources de données. Parce qu'il faut savoir auprès de quelle institution il faut aller chercher l'information d'abord. Ensuite, en fonction de la source de données, nous avons les fiches de collecte de données qui sont régulièrement actualisées. À la suite de ça, les fiches sont envoyées aux fournisseurs de données, que ce soit de façon physique ou par mail. Et en dernier ressort, il faut aller récupérer ces fiches et analyser ces données-là. Nous allons aborder maintenant les indicateurs de mesure de l'accès à l'électricité. Au Bénin, il y a 4 indicateurs. Nous avons d'abord le taux d'électrification. Ensuite, nous avons le taux d'accès à l'électricité. Il y a le taux de couverture. Et enfin, nous avons le taux de décès. Donc, dans les présentations qui vont venir, nous allons revenir sur ces indicateurs-là et définir tout ça. Nous allons commencer par le taux d'électrification. Qu'est-ce que nous appelons taux d'électrification au Bénin? En fait, c'est la proportion des ménages ayant accès à l'électricité par raccordement direct grâce au réseau, mini-réseau, bien une politique d'État. Quand on parle d'accès à l'électricité, ici, nous nous basons beaucoup plus sur les ménages. Et dans la définition de l'Afrique, au début, ils ont parlé de la population. C'est vrai, on peut avoir un ratio entre ménages, nombre de population par ménage, mais nous nous focalisons ici sur les ménages, principalement. Donc, la définition, ici, les données que nous utilisons pour pouvoir calculer, nous avons le nombre de ménages total du pays que nous collectons auprès de l'Institut en charge de la statistique. Les sources de données sont présentées là. Ensuite, nous avons le nombre de ménages électrifiés que nous collectons auprès de la société de distribution d'énergie électrique. Donc, avec cette société, nous avons les données sur le réseau interconnecté. Ensuite, au niveau de la Direction générale de la planification, nous avons les données sur le nombre de ménages ayant accès à l'électricité via les mini-centrales solaires et les lignes sous-traitées. Donc, ces données sont collectées et les indicateurs sont élaborés par commune, par département et au niveau pays. Et pour chaque niveau de découpage territorial, nous avons les indicateurs agrégés et nous avons aussi les indicateurs en zone urbaine et en zone rurale. Nous allons aborder maintenant le taux d'accès à l'électricité. Le taux d'accès à l'électricité est généralement plus grand, plus élevé que le taux d'électrification. Quand on parle du taux d'accès à l'électricité, c'est la proportion des ménages ayant accès à l'électricité par raccordement direct ou indirect. Et là, nous ajoutons les lignes sous-traitées. Tout à l'heure, on nous a parlé des raccordements peut-être frauduleux en griffe. Il y a un ménage qui a accès direct par le réseau interconnecté, mais il y a un autre ménage peut-être qui est à côté qui profite de ce ménage-là. Donc, c'est ça que nous appelons les lignes sous-traitées. Et ce sont des données que nous avons par enquête. Aussi, pour l'accès à l'électricité, nous prenons en compte les ménages qui ont accès à l'électricité par leurs propres moyens, c'est-à-dire les groupes électrogènes, les moulins à maïs, les kits solaires individuels. Donc, ces données sont aussi, ces indicateurs du moins sont aussi publiés au niveau national pour le pays. au niveau départemental, au niveau de la commune. Et pour ces 3 niveaux, c'est élaboré en zone urbaine et en zone rurale. La précision à apporter ici, c'est la différence entre le taux d'électrification et le taux d'accès à l'électricité. En plus de la connexion au réseau et au mini-réseau, le taux d'accès prend en compte la connexion via les kits solaires, les systèmes solaires domestiques. Et nous considérons ici dans nos statistiques les kits solaires domestiques qui ont une capacité supérieure ou égale à 50 watts crête. Donc, tout ce qui est inférieur à 50 watts crête au Bénin, nous ne prenons pas ça en compte dans l'accès à l'électricité. Donc, les promoteurs des systèmes solaires photovoltaïques sont sensibilisés par rapport à ça et les données qu'ils mettent à notre disposition régulièrement respectent ces critères-là. Donc, les données concernant l'accès à l'électricité via les groupes électrogènes, les moulins à maïs, sont les données d'enquête que nous collectons auprès de l'Institut en charge de la statistique. Ensuite, nous allons aborder le taux de couverture. Qu'est-ce que nous appelons taux de couverture? C'est la proportion des unités administratives électrifiées par rapport au nombre d'unités administratives totales au Bénin. Au Bénin, nous avons 5295 unités administratives. Et dans la logique de cet indicateur, si un seul ménage est raccordé au réseau dans une unité administrative, nous considérons que cette localité est couverte et l'indicateur passe au vert au niveau de cet indicateur, au niveau de la donnée passe au vert au niveau de cet indicateur-là. Donc, à ce niveau, je reprends, pour les unités administratives électrifiées, ce sont les données. Nous prenons les données au niveau de la Société béninoise d'électricité. Nous prenons aussi les données que nous avons à notre niveau, au niveau de la Direction générale de la planification énergétique, qui concernent les mini-centrales solaires. Donc là, c'est le réseau interconnecté et les mini-centrales solaires. Ici, ce n'est plus forcément le nombre de ménages qui compte. Si un seul ménage est connecté, nous supposons que l'unité administrative est électrifiée. Donc, voilà un peu comment nous évaluons le taux de couverture. Le dernier indicateur pour mesurer l'accès à l'électricité, c'est le taux de décès. Là, par contre, nous parlons de la population desservie. Qu'est-ce qu'on appelle population desservie? Si la localité est raccordée par le réseau ou bien par un mini-réseau, nous supposons que toute la population de l'unité administrative ou bien de la localité a accès à l'électricité. Donc, nous prenons l'ensemble de la population des unités administratives électrifiées que nous divisons par la population totale de la zone, que ce soit de la commune, que ce soit du département, que ce soit du pays. Et ces indicateurs sont aussi évalués en zone urbaine et en zone rurale. Donc, voilà un peu comment nous évaluons les indicateurs. Nous mesurons l'accès à l'électricité au Bénin via ces 4 indicateurs-là. Tout ça, c'est pour montrer un peu soit l'effort du gouvernement, parce que si un ménage est raccordé, le gouvernement raccordé et la population n'a pas les moyens pour venir demander à l'accès, il faut un écart, parce que le taux de couverture, par exemple, nous permet de dire que, au moins le gouvernement a déjà fait l'effort de raccorder le ménage. Mais avec le taux d'électrification, on va maintenant jusqu'au niveau de ménage pour regarder, une fois que la localité est raccordée, combien de ménages ont pu vraiment se faire raccorder, ont vraiment accès à l'électricité. Maintenant, en termes de quelques résultats, vous voyez là les tendances. À l'extrême gauche, vous avez le taux d'électrification présenté de 2016 jusqu'en 2024. Bon, pour les données de 2024, ce sont des estimations parce que nous n'avons pas encore collecté les données. Donc, voilà un peu le taux d'électrification, l'évolution de 2016. Et on note l'écart aussi qu'il y a au niveau du milieu urbain et le milieu rural. Donc, le taux d'électrification, par exemple, si je prends en 2024, c'est estimé à 9%. Alors que en zone, non, à 9% en zone rurale, alors qu'en zone urbaine, nous sommes à 59%. Et le taux d'accès à l'électricité, comme je l'ai dit tout à l'heure, c'est plus élevé que le taux d'électrification. Là, si je prends par exemple la donnée de 2023, pour le taux d'accès à l'électricité, nous sommes à 13% en zone rurale et en zone urbaine, nous sommes autour de 65%. Donc, le taux d'accès à l'électricité au niveau national en 2023 au Bénin est de 41%. Sur cette carte, par exemple, nous avons présenté la répartition du taux d'accès à l'électricité par commune. Ça, c'est pour l'année 2023. Donc, en couleur claire, là, vous avez les taux, les communes qui ont un taux entre 5 et 25%. Donc, les communes aussi qui ont un taux supérieur à 75% sont en jaune. Et là, nous voyons qu'il n'y a que 5 communes qui ont un taux d'accès à l'électricité supérieur à 75% en 2013 au Bénin. Et les deux graphes ici présentent le taux de couverture à gauche et à droite le taux de décès. Donc, le taux de couverture, comme je l'ai dit tout à l'heure, c'est le ratio entre le nombre d'unités administratives électrifiées et le nombre d'unités administratives totales. Donc, voilà un peu les tendances. Donc, en zone rurale, on note qu'il y a toujours un effort à fournir pour rattraper la zone urbaine. Sur cette carte, c'est le taux de couverture qui est projeté. Bon, taux de couverture pour l'année 2023. Et il y a aussi, on a 7 communes qui ont un taux de couverture supérieur à 75%. Donc, il faut noter que, bon, parmi ces 7, il y a au moins 3 qui sont déjà à 100% en termes de couverture. Nous allons aborder les défis. Ici, nous allons faire un zoom sur 3. C'est vrai qu'il y en a plus que ça, mais les 3 les plus importants. Il faut noter que les données d'accès à l'électricité, par exemple, à partir des lignes sous-traitées, à partir des moulins groupes électrogènes, sont des données d'enquête. Et ces données ont beaucoup d'incertitudes. Donc, les dispositions sont en cours pour actualiser, pour organiser d'autres enquêtes, et pour avoir de nouvelles données. Les données d'accès à l'électricité aussi via les kits solaires, c'est vrai, il y a beaucoup de promoteurs de kits solaires. Donc, pour le moment, nous n'arrivons pas encore à collecter toutes ces informations. Donc, ce que nous avons aujourd'hui, ce n'est pas exhaustif. Il y a un travail encore à faire pour améliorer la qualité de ces données. Et le dernier point, ce sont les ménages. Parce que nous pouvons avoir, par exemple, un ménage qui a plusieurs compteurs ou bien 2 ou 3 ménages qui utilisent le même compteur. Ce qui fait que des fois, il y a quelquefois des biais au niveau de la prise en compte, effectivement, du nombre de ménages ayant accès à l'électricité. Donc, voilà en résumé l'expérience du Bénin en matière d'accès, en matière de mesure de l'accès à l'électricité. Merci beaucoup. Merci à l'Afrique.
Merci beaucoup, Pascal, pour cette présentation. Je pense qu'il y a une question du Sénégal qui est dans le chat. Donc, tu peux voir si tu peux essayer de répondre. Maintenant, je pense que nous abordons la phase des questions-réponses. So, colleague, I think there is a lot of questions with chat.
On my end, I don't have anything specific to reply to. I've replied to a lot of questions on the Q&A already by typing the answers. So if there are any other questions, then I'm happy to take them. But yeah, I don't have anything particular that I wanted to flag. Thank you again, Samson.
Okay. No, I think there's still one there. Bruno from Robert. I don't know if you saw that one. There are still some there for you specifically. What are the degree can also assess the quality of electricity access data from supply side data? The same way we World Bank colleague mentioned, this question should be included, something like that. Okay. So, Sandra, do you want to say something?
My apology, Samson. There was a period in the middle I was not getting the voice. Can you repeat the question and I'll answer it?
No, I was saying that if you solve a question with chat, there are some questions with chat. Do you want to answer to some of them? If yes, please proceed.
I'm looking at the chat.
Maybe on the point that you mentioned, sorry, regarding the reliability, I think here, obviously, the SAIDI and SAIF indicators are extremely valuable. And that is why we try to take into account when we estimate the level of access, which goes from an essential bundle all the way up to like modern energy minimum, we try to look at, like the duration of the service that is provided to each end user, trying to help categorize on which kind of bundle they fall under. Because we know that, like this is a very big issue for many African countries where, like there are blackouts that can last, many hours a day and can happen for many days on a month. So yeah, maybe I'll stop there and I'll let Sandeep complement if he wants to speak about this particular issue.
Sure. I'm assuming, if you don't mind, Bruno, can you just repeat what question it is? Because I'm looking at the different questions that are there.
Yeah, I think it's the one, I mean, originally was targeted towards the IEA, but I think the World Bank obviously has a lot of expertise on this as well, regarding to what degree do we assess the quality of the electricity access? So reliability, quality. So again, we're talking SAIDI, SAIFI kind of indicators. Yeah.
Okay. So yes, in fact, the reality is when we bring out our SDG 7 report, the key data source that we have is coming from the censuses, which, as I said, because of the gaps in data and so forth, there are problems in that. But in addition to that, we only have a yes, no. Do you have access and do you not have access? And as I was listening to the speaker from Benin earlier, I could also see that there are obviously certain issues here. If, for example, you are saying that the entire administrative unit has electricity because there is one household that you've assessed is connected, those are the kinds of things that pose issues even on the binary yes, no question. Then when we go deeper into it on quality issues, you have, of course, the MTF framework or the multi-tier framework, where we go and we do what we would call an unbiased sample survey, where we go into the households, we have questionnaires and we get those questionnaires answered. And that is where we get different, deeper, more granular quality information. And that will range from, what's the kind of system that they have in their house, what's the usage that they're doing, what's the level of affordability, how are they paying their bills, and that type of information comes in through those questionnaires. But clearly, what happens here is, by the time you do a survey of this nature, a household survey going from one house to the other, it's not an exercise that is, number one, cheap. It's not an exercise that you can do continuously, and there will be gaps again between that. And frankly, with 219 countries that we have around the world, and just your 55 members of AFRIC, we would take a long time reaching all of them. So what we are able to do in MTF surveys provides us the quality information on some places, but I think we have to work much more on the analysis part of that, which is to say that if we've done, for example, 5,000 households in Nigeria, that data from Nigeria, is it only specifically Nigerian, or is there analysis that will allow us to make certain assumptions that are beyond just that particular place? So that's one way to look at it. And then the other sort of thing is when we do look at the sales data from different places. So we are able to say, okay, there are so many solar home systems sold here or in that place, and that should give us an indication. But really, to be very honest about it, I would say that we need to do a lot more work if we are to trace the quality issues around even the grid electricity access. Is it a 15-hour power cut? Is it a 3-hour power cut? Those types of issues. And then there is the whole area of the off. So I think in both places, we would want to modernize more and develop more information from on the ground. And even if we cannot do sort of the actual physical face-to-face surveys in every country because it takes a long time, maybe we do need to use more modern, for example, mobile-based surveys and other more modern techniques that will allow us to get more granular information. I'll stop here and turn it back to you, Samson.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sansanji, and thank you very much for for this debate. I think very, very good discussion. I think as you mentioned, you point out clearly, Sandy, we may need further discussion between FREG, World Bank, and then IEA, and see how we can organize another discussion again about this very, very important topic on access to electricity, because you can see now from a presentation from Kenya, it's clear mentioned that the access to electricity is produced by the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics. But when you look at the presentation from Benin, it's produced by the Ministry of Energy. So I think those are the debates that we need to clarify, we need to discuss and make sure that we encourage the collaboration within the institution at national level so that we have very good access to electricity rate. Because it was clearly mentioned that, okay, look, when you look at the one from the National Bureau of Statistics, is only through survey. And then we know the survey also have some limitation. And then also when you look at also from the one from the Ministry of Energy, is a connection it's a lot about the connection. So how can we make sure that we combine all those methodologies together and have very good access rate? I think we can continue this debate within the three institutions and then see how we can organize another webinar again to address clearly this institution, to allow many countries to come and share their experience, because today we hear a lot from institution, but we hear only from 2 countries. So we need to listen more to country now and see what's the problem, what's the challenge that they are facing. And then I think the debate is still open, and then we can see later how we can come in. I saw my colleague want to take the floor. So Bande, please, over to you.
Merci, Samson. Je prends très rapidement la parole pour répondre à une question dans le chat concernant le taux d'accès et le taux de couverture. Je crois que c'est un très long débat qu'il y a aujourd'hui au niveau des pays, et je voudrais clarifier pour faire un peu la différence entre les deux. D'abord, il faut parler, il y a la notion du taux d'électrification et du taux d'accès à l'électricité qui, certains pays scindent ces 2 taux. Le taux d'électrification est souvent considéré comme le nombre de ménages raccordés au réseau et au mini-réseau sur le nombre total de ménages. Et alors que le taux d'accès à l'électricité est considéré comme le nombre de ménages raccordés au service d'électricité ou par les moyens personnels, donc tous ceux qui en gros ont accès à l'électricité. Et donc, il faut être précis dans ça. Dans d'autres pays, on ne fait pas la distinction. C'est la clarification que je voulais apporter. Chez d'autres, c'est uniquement le taux d'accès. Et peu importe, on ne fait pas cette distinction, mais d'autres pays le font, un peu comme le Bénin l'a présenté tout à l'heure. Donc, j'ai vu qu'il y a une question du Sénégal par rapport à ça. Je voudrais clarifier ça. Il y a des pays qui ne scindent pas les taux d'accès, qui considèrent un seul taux d'accès, qui est appelé taux d'accès ou taux d'électrification. Mais il y a d'autres pays que j'ai constaté qu'eux, ils scindent. Ils ont le taux d'électrification et le taux d'accès à l'électricité. Et là, il a parlé du taux de couverture. Là, je donnerai une définition pour dire que le taux de couverture, c'est généralement le nombre d'unités administratives électrifiées sur le nombre total d'unités administratives. Et il y a également le taux de desserte, qui est la population totale des unités administratives électrifiées sur la population totale. Donc, c'est un certain nombre de taux qui font souvent référence à la même chose, mais qui n'ont pas les mêmes explications. Donc, il faut faire très attention quand un pays scinde le taux d'électrification et le taux d'accès et un autre pays ne le fait pas. Donc, c'est tout ce travail d'harmonisation dont je parlais dans ma présentation pour dire qu'il faut que l'Afrique se penche vraiment sur ce travail-là pour vraiment adopter une définition commune qui sera vulgarisée donc à tous les pays. Et tout le monde est appelé à contribuer à ce travail. Parce que j'ai vu dans le chat des personnes qui sont, je crois, des personnes ressources qui se proposent de contribuer à ce travail-là. Donc, lorsque le travail en lui-même sera lancé, ce serait vraiment un grand débat qu'on va ouvrir pour vraiment harmoniser ce travail-là de fond. Et donc, il n'est pas besoin ici de jeter l'anathème sur un ou un autre pays parce qu'il fait ci, parce qu'il fait ça, vraiment de comprendre les réalités vont d'un pays à l'autre. Voilà, c'est la clarification que je voulais apporter. Merci.
Thank you very much. Monsieur Bangali, vous avez la parole. Vous voulez parler, non?
Ok, je vais parler. Merci beaucoup de m'avoir donné la parole. Je suis vraiment ravi de cette organisation de webinaire qui concerne essentiellement l'Afrique, qui a un taux d'accès très faible par rapport aux autres continents. Et je veux d'abord le dernier intervenant qui vient de donner les différentes définitions des taux d'accès, taux d'électrification, taux de couverture. Il y a des différentes définitions. Avant de poser la question à Pascal, donc si vous prenez le taux d'électrification, c'est le nombre d'habitations électrifiées sur le nombre total d'habitations du pays. Maintenant, le taux d'accès à l'électricité, c'est la population c'est la population vivant dans les localités électrifiées sur la population totale du pays. Le taux de couverture nationale, c'est le nombre de localités électrifiées sur le nombre total de localités du pays. Donc, chaque institution a sa définition par rapport aux indicateurs. Maintenant, concernant Pascal, dans ses calculs de taux d'accès à l'électricité, n'a pas comptabilisé ce qu'on appelle ici le hors réseau. C'est l'assistance personnelle pour s'alimenter. Donc, alors que dans les zones rurales, c'est ce qui est courant, les autoproducteurs, les panneaux solaires que les gens utilisent pour s'alimenter. Donc, si nous négligeons dans le calcul des taux d'accès, une partie, c'est-à-dire vous prenez le réseau principal, les mini-réseaux, et vous négligez ce qu'on appelle le hors-réseau. Donc, ça veut dire que quelque part, le taux a fauché. Donc, c'est pourquoi il y a des écarts parfois entre les calculs des différents faits par les différentes institutions, par les ministères, par les agences de régulation. Donc, M. Pascal, mon ami de Bénin, que je connais, on s'est rencontrés plusieurs fois, et je pense qu'il faut penser à ce niveau-là, qu'il faut tenir compte des producteurs, des gens qui s'alimentent à partir des panneaux solaires qui doivent rentrer aussi en ligne de compte pour le calcul des taux d'accès. Merci beaucoup pour l'attention.
Merci beaucoup, M. Bangali. Et s'il vous plaît, fermez votre micro comme vous avez fini de parler là. Vous pouvez fermer votre micro, non, M. Bangali? Ok, merci. M. Smaïla Goro, vous avez la parole. M. Smaïla Goro, oui, allez-y. Présentez-vous et vous avez la parole.
Ok, Goro Smaïla, je suis de Burkina Faso. Alors, moi, j'ai une question à l'endroit de M. Pascal. Voilà, donc j'aimerais savoir, dans le calcul du taux d'électrification, au numérateur, il a parlé du nombre de ménages. Donc, ma question, elle est simple. Qu'appelle-t-on ménage? Est-ce que c'est un ménage ordinaire ou une unité administrative électrifiée est un ménage? En un mot, est-ce qu'un abonné, c'est un ménage? Donc, c'est cette clarification-là que je voulais. Merci.
Ok, merci beaucoup, M. Pascal, pour cette question. Maintenant, je pense qu'il y a deux panélistes qui ont demandé. M. Goro, pardon. M. Goro. Donc, je vais peut-être, avant de donner la parole à Pascal, je vais maintenant donner la parole à M. Bruno et M. Sandid. M. Bruno, vous avez la parole.
Merci, thank you very much. I just wanted to touch on a point that was mentioned before about combining combining the survey data with the demand data. Just to say that, you know, like we went through, well, I went through my presentation a little bit, the advantages and disadvantages of both. And Sandeep did a very good job on, you know, like presenting the great utility of obviously having that, you know, like face-to-face interface with the people on the ground. But I just want to flag that, to me, the idea of combining those, it's not how we should think about it as much as complementing these two. So if you remember my presentation from before, there are often these gaps between the demand side data, which is the one that we do with surveys, that obviously can get filled relatively accurately, as we show in our calculations, with the supply side data. So thinking in terms of those two combining each other rather than, complementing each other rather than combining, I think is the right framing. And then I wanted to answer a question briefly that is mentioned in the chat that says, can we include the number of customers who illegally connect to the grid and consume electricity when we calculate access to electricity? So here, the way we see it at the IEA is no, you should not count those in. And the main reason for that is that if you count those as having access, you will never know the right size of the problem, how many people are connecting illegally to the grid, if you count those as connected to the grid as having electricity access. So the approach that we suggest to address this issue is to not count those that are illegally connected to the grid, and then looking at the amount of electricity that is being consumed and looking at the losses that are non-technical from your grid. And that can help you estimate the size of the problem when you talk about how many people are connecting illegally to the grid. So for instance, I think it was in the case of Ethiopia that they were able to estimate with a similar process that less than half of the population was actually legally connected to their grid using this kind of approach. So in our estimation, from a data tracking perspective, it's important not to count those as being electrified. Yeah. Thank you.
I think maybe we may discuss later about this informal issue, because this is something which is very important in Africa. But it's just a further discussion to know how better we can do that. So, yeah. Sandeep, please, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Let me actually come in on a couple of different points, but let me start with where Bruno left off. I actually am going to talk a little bit about my on-ground experience, and it wasn't, this particular example I'm giving you wasn't in Africa, it was actually in Asia. But basically, we had this similar problem where we were looking at what is the financial viability of the utility. And there was a certain amount of power that was going out, and there was a certain amount of payment that was coming in, and there was a big gap in that. And all of that gap was being put increasingly on technical losses. But when you started seeing technical losses that were above 30% or 35%, you know this is not the case, right? So there is a lot of theft going on. And again, the issue of how do you get this theft in the first place caught up, because even if it is not just a matter of measuring who has electricity and who does not, it becomes a matter of, can you really expand your grid if your losses are going to be this large? And that then starts impacting whether you will reach universal access. But coming back to this example, the moment questions were raised about technical losses, suddenly we found that this was all moved into agricultural load. The reason being that the agricultural load was not metered. It was just, this is agricultural load because it's going into this rural area. And why I'm going with this is because if you want to do this correctly, you will have to look at metering. You will have to not have certain customer classes which you don't have meters for. So I think that will be extremely important to look into. So that's one part. The second thing I wanted to just reiterate is, we are really very, very thankful listening to the presentations from both Benin as well as Kenya.
Kenya.
Kenya. And the idea here is not that, when we're pointing out that, hey, this is not exactly correct, it's not to put blame or deficiency on anyone, but to rather point to the need for a common framework through which this is done. And this common framework, my own view would be that the right parties to look into some of this may be the National Statistical Offices. And I know that their remit goes far beyond energy. And therefore, there is a need for them to also have, let's say, more capacity building and understanding on potentially what it is that the energy sector needs in terms of data, and develop a common framework around that. That could be the NSOs, and clearly it also needs to involve the ministries. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much. So, Pascal, sorry, before I give the floor to you, let me hear from, we have 3 persons who raised their hand. I'll give them a floor, and then we come back to Pascal. We'll make a run for the panel discussion, and then we can close. Let's go to Ariel. Ariel, you have a floor.
Yes. I'm Ariel Vinyepuye. I'm from Cameroon. I'm an energy engineer. And I have a question for people from Kenya and Benin. And in Cameroon, we have rural electrification project, and the main problem we have to address the gap between urban area and rural area is that here in Cameroon, the cost of electricity is more expensive in rural areas. And I want to know if other countries, Kenya, Benin, also have done in the survey you have conducted, and if you also have the same problem, or in all the projects you have, the government have invested, is this because maybe the return on investment is small in urban area, between rural areas, or what is the main cause of the gaps between rural area and urban area in access of electricity? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So we last who has the questions, Miheret, please, over to you. Introduce yourself and proceed.
Thank you, everyone, for this valuable contribution and to inviting me. I'm trying to give some points. I manage more than 10 years, the Universal Electrification Access
Can
Program.
you introduce yourself?
Yes, can you hear me?
Can you introduce yourself?
Okay, I'm Dr. Murat. I manage the Ethiopian Electric Power more than 10 years. Rectification is one of my portfolio. So including regional interconnections and also the power pool leadership and so on. So I would like to share my experience and some knowledge of the subject. So by managing the rectification, starting from the beginning, it was defined in Ethiopia like about a minimum 200 family local administration is eligible to be for electrification with 5 per capita family, and about 15,000 villages identified. And through off-grid and grid electrification, when the electric access reaches this village, so the electrified village is quantified in such a way to define access. Of course, one of the challenges to define what is the penetration rate in vis-a-vis access and the quality of electric supply. So access should be measured quantitative, qualitative way. I think I have seen the World Bank model of 5 categories of access. This is one area we should support AFREC to unify this definition. The other point I would like to emphasize is you know, historically, if I see the World Bank WDI data of 60-year access, is that access defined globally with the same parameter? I think the answer is no. So we have the responsibility to define the access with a unified methodology, say the data, the variables which determine access, and the models, the analytical tools, all these things should be defined in a way customized to the African case. I know for Africa is a difficult position, big, challenging assignment. We should support in such a way Africa mobilizing the national stakeholders, the regional, continental, and global stakeholders, how he can adapt one of transitional you know, tools to define access. Then with time, I mean, it could be rectified, it could be improved. Because now access, according to the definition, even today with IEA, with World Bank, and the country experience, it is important to support Africa to adapt one workable, you know, tool such that they can define access in African context. Of course, in this respect, many stakeholders should be on board. This initiative should be concretely organized with dedicated team, and we have to set a roadmap, and we have to deliver on the ground. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Doctor, for this very good contribution. I think for sure Africa will get in touch with you to discuss with you later how you can support us to develop the document that we want to do in Africa to harmonize the concept and definition. Now, I think I will now start with but I will give a floor to panelists now. So let the last round discussion. So I will start with Pascal. Pascal, please, over to you. And then I will now go to Kenya after IEA and then World Bank. Pascal, please, you have the floor.
Je vais commencer par partager mon écran parce que je voudrais répondre à la préoccupation de Bangali qui, dans son intervention, il semble qu'il n'a pas vu les données dans l'accès à l'électricité, les données que nous utilisons. Au niveau du diapo de la présentation 8, j'ai bien noté les kits solaires individuels sont prises en compte pour l'accès, pour évaluer l'accès à l'électricité. Donc, les efforts propres de la population, tout ça, c'est pas négligé. Donc, nous prenons bel et bien en compte ces données-là, tout ce qui concerne le système solaire domestique au niveau des ménages, les mini-réseaux qui sont installés aussi, nous prenons toutes ces informations en compte. Ensuite, Monsieur Gros, qui voulait savoir un ménage. Qu'est-ce que c'est? La définition, à mon avis, un ménage, là, nous pouvons dire que c'est l'ensemble des personnes qui partagent la même résidence principale, hein, même si ceux-là n'ont pas vraiment un lien de parenté. Donc, en termes clairs ou bien en termes simples, nous pouvons définir un ménage comme ça. Maintenant, sa préoccupation surtout, c'est de savoir comment est-ce que nous utilisons les ménages dans l'accès à l'électricité. Pour finir, avant de finir ma présentation, j'avais parlé des défis. Et en parlant des défis, j'avais bien dit que des fois, il y a des ménages qui ont plusieurs abonnements. Et il y a d'autres, dans certains cas, il y a plusieurs ménages qui partagent le même compteur. Donc, pour ça, pour utiliser le nombre de ménages, au Bénin, nous avons un ratio avec l'Institut en charge de la statistique, nous avons un ratio entre le nombre d'abonnements et le nombre de ménages. Donc, c'est ce ratio que nous utilisons pour pouvoir déduire le nombre de ménages raccordés. Donc, je pense que c'est la préoccupation de Diouf, j'ai déjà répondu à ça. Il y a aussi Bandé qui a expliqué un peu, je ne vais plus revenir là-dessus. Il y a Ariel aussi qui a parlé des difficultés liées à l'accès à l'électricité en zone rurale. Oui, la difficulté est là. Ça se constate aussi dans les indicateurs que j'ai montrés tout à l'heure. Maintenant, le constat est tout simple, hein. En zone rurale, les revenus de la population est généralement faible. Alors que si nous avons une société commerciale qui gère la distribution, cette société vise d'abord la rentabilité. Donc, c'est peut-être c'est l'explication que je pourrais donner. Donc, je vais laisser les autres aussi compléter. Merci.
Okay, thank you very much, Benin. I think you can stop sharing your screen. Then we proceed to Kenya. Raymond, do you want to come in before we close? Benin, please stop sharing your screen.
Well, thank you very much, Samson. Basically, all the Kenya-related questions actually I've responded to on the chat. However, I think there was a question by Ariel on the cost disparities between rural and urban areas. Basically, that
Ramon, come close to the mic.
I'm very close to the mic.
Yeah, but don't move. Because if you move,
Yeah,
cannot hear you.
so, all right. So I was basically saying that most of the Kenya-specific questions I've already responded to in the chat. But the specific question by Ariel on the cost disparity between the rural and urban areas and how basically it affects access rates and how we dealt it from the Kenya experience is that, as earlier mentioned in my presentation, actually implementing the rural electrification program. Now, this is being used to sort of try and offset those cost disparities. How do we do this? We are implementing what we call a match funding scheme. Now, this match funding scheme basically provides for developers of mini grids in the off-grid areas where they provide their capex requirements, and then the Rural Electrification Authority supplements that particular capex requirement. This in turn, of course, as a regulator, we use that supplement to subsidize the tariff, and in the end, of course, the cost is relatively lower. We also provide other technical assistance and financial in the form of grants. There are green mini grid facility, which is very heavy in Kenya. This is also used to offset some other items within the capex, which directly translates to lowering of the eventual cost of electricity within the rural areas. So just to speak on the overall discussion of sharing electricity access, yes, it's key that we need to harmonize our methodologies, not just to realize the objectives of Mission 300, but also there's also another particular program, and that is Africa Single Electricity Market, which aims to have one centralized grid by 2063. So in having an harmonized access rate or a harmonized access methodology will definitely inform investments, not just in generation, network expansion, but even in load placements overall. So it's key that we look, and probably we can have extra discussions on the same. Thank you, Samson.
Thank you so much, Ramon. So Bruno, the last thought before we close.
Sure. Thank you so much. I've seen a lot of questions in the chat that speak about, like how do we now move forward, progress on electricity access, what is to do, and so on. I think obviously context here of each country matters greatly. Africa is a huge continent, 55 countries, so there is a lot to be done there. In my opinion, I think oftentimes what we find the issue to be is like a chicken and egg kind of problem, where you don't have electricity in order to power an economy, but you also don't have an economy to pay for that electricity in the first place, right? So like, how do you solve this one? And obviously dumping a bunch of solar panels in Africa is not going to solve this. So I think having programs that have as a focus, we can call it energy for growth, productive uses of energy, in terms of like planning, once you have the energy, how you will put it to use in order to stimulate economic growth and being able to pay for that power. It's a way to unlock that, right? And break that vicious cycle, I guess we can call it. There is also the issue of, the paradox of some countries that don't have full energy access today, producing more electricity access that is then not consumed, right? So like, because they cannot either reach end users because there is not a grid, or also because they don't even have like connections with neighboring countries where they could potentially export that electricity and sell it. So there are many elements that I think we need to look at in terms of, like how to break this lock and go forward. But I think a very useful one is to really think in terms of like energy for growth and having development programs in hand with electrification programs, right? And that's for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much to bring that initiative of energy for growth. I think this very good issue. So Sandeep, the last word from your end. Over to you, Sandeep.
No, thank you very much. And I wanted to kind of basically state that first and foremost, it's important to recognize that every year, according to the SDG 7, there is approximately 30 million more connections added per year in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, not even the 55 African countries, but rather the 48 that constitute sub-Saharan Africa. Now, the challenge is big because we're pretty much treading water, because as population is increasing, we are at that pace. And I think we need to recognize that there is a need to push on all cylinders on the grid expansion. And I was very, very happy to hear that Kenya basically believes they will reach universal access by 2030.
We hope so.
Sorry? Yes.
We hope so.
Yes. But what I'm seeing also is that when I look at the countries with the largest access deficit, Nigeria, DRC, Ethiopia comes in there, Tanzania, Mozambique, Burkina Faso. I mean, these numbers that we're talking about are huge. And the other thing to keep in mind is that when we put up a 50 peak watt system, or we don't, that system has a life. And it's not just that every new system on the off-grid that we are adding is just adding one more household. You also have to see how many households now have to buy a new system because the old one has died. So there are many, many rather complex data needs that we cannot on our own just do. Household surveys in 48 sub-Saharan African countries is going to take a long time. There has to be stuff that we do internally with NSOs, with ministries, and make sure that our monitoring and our data collection improves in its quality, improves in its frequency, and that we use all the modern techniques that we are having. The other key point to make is that we do need to have a common framework. So if it is 50 peak watt system in Kenya, it cannot be 30 peak watt in a different, in Benin, it cannot be a 30 peak watt in another country, and somebody is counting administration in one way, another one in another way. So there needs to be some basic minimum platform on methodology that we all agree on. And I'm very thankful to Dr. Mihiret from Ethiopia, who also made that point. I think that's where our next step should be in terms of coming up with these, common platforms, get broad agreement, and then move with the 55 country members that you have. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Sandy, for this very good takeaway. I think you summarized very well the way forward. So I don't know if my colleague Mandy wants to say something before we close. Mandy, over to you. If you want to say something.
Merci, Samson. Je crois que c'est au vu des discussions et de la participation nombreuse des gens, nous voyons l'importance du sujet. Et l'Afrique, je dirais, vient d'ouvrir la boîte de Pandore. Parce que si nous sommes là à discuter, nous allons rester ici jusqu'à demain, on n'aura jamais fini. Quand vous jetez un coup d'œil dans le chat, vous allez voir les différentes questions variées et qui tous se rapportent à l'accès à l'électricité. Et donc, il est très important pour nous vraiment de lancer ce débat, de commencer à faire un travail de fond pour vraiment harmoniser, comme ça a été l'une de nos recommandations, harmoniser les différentes définitions. Je crois que monsieur de l'Éthiopie l'a aussi évoqué. C'est très important de se mettre d'accord sur quelque chose parce que quand vous voyez les débats, chacun a sa manière de penser. Et comme je l'ai dit, les réalités sont différentes d'un pays à l'autre. Et donc, en mettant en œuvre ces actions d'harmonisation et aussi de partage d'expériences, nous allons pouvoir arriver à vraiment aboutir à un consensus qui va nous permettre tous d'adopter une bonne méthodologie de calcul. Et en même temps, je profite de l'occasion pour lancer un appel à tous les pays à vraiment mettre l'accent sur le calcul de cette taux-là. qui sont vraiment d'une importance capitale quand on veut mesurer vraiment le niveau de développement du secteur de l'énergie dans un pays. Donc, c'était avec plaisir que j'ai partagé avec les collègues et je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup. Sandy, there is a last question in the chat. I don't know if you want to take it before we close. Sandy, if you can, I can read for you. The person said, I would like to hear from World Bank. What is the rate target of electricity, I hope, access in Africa after implementing the 300 mission project?
Okay, let me put it in the following manner. Our last report, we talked about the global rate that was around 0.59%, I believe, a year. What we need to reach electricity access by 2030 would be more than double of that in global terms. But in terms of Africa, I believe, and I'm going to, also check in with my colleague Patrick, who sees the data much more closely, but I believe the number was more than double of what current rates are. And I believe it was 1.18 or 1.08. Patrick, can you come in and just correct me in terms of sub-Saharan Africa, because we have not got it classified in terms of the 55 African countries, but we have it classified as sub-Saharan Africa. So Patrick, if you can unmute and tell us what you think. I mean, it's roughly double. It's more than double actually of the current rate. That's
You're
why
right.
I said
It's almost between 1.8 and 1.10. It's almost double.
Yeah. So that's the challenge and the opportunity, which means that we really can't do business the way we were doing it. We have to come up with new innovative ways. And frankly, neither the World Bank nor the IEA nor the other development agencies can do this alone. It needs to happen from the ground up. I'll stop here.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think we have a very good discussion. So on behalf of the Executive Director of AFREC, I really want to thank Sandy from World Bank as well as Patrick, and then also my brother Bruno from EIA, and then also colleague from Kenya, Ramon and Pascal, for this very, very good webinar. I think as pointed out very well by, our colleague from Ethiopia, we really need to put our hand together and work on that harmonization issue, because it's very important. I think it's very important that we put our hand together to work on that harmonization issue and make sure that we rate that we calculate in Kenya, we can compare easily. For we want to calculate in Zimbabwe, we want to calculate in Zambia, in Botswana, in Nigeria, in any country, it should be the same. So on behalf of Executive Director of AFREC, I really want to thank all the panelists and then also all those who attend this very important webinar. I can assure you that we are going to share all the PowerPoint presentation with all those who attend this webinar, as well as the recording of this webinar, because we think that this workshop, something that it can be a capacity building for country, because I saw very good presentation from Bruno, from Sandy, Patrick, from Raymond, Pascal, as well as Bande, can serve as a capacity building for country. So we are going to share all this material with country. And then also, as Sandy pointed out clearly, we need to have a bilateral meeting with each institution here later and see how we can continue this discussion. Because my colleague Bande pointed out clearly, we can see now the discussion didn't end. It looks like we just open, as we say in French, on our went what the Pandora. So I think it's difficult to, we engage now in some discussion that it will be a very, very long discussion. And then as Pandora also mentioned, we also in Africa now, we are starting working on SDG 7 report. And then we just finalize the first edition now. I think normally by May, we report will be ready and then we launch. So we'll be happy to collaborate later with our colleague from EIA, World Bank, during when we are doing the other edition, so that we can stay with one story in Africa, because when you have one country or one continent, you have only one indicator. You cannot have two data for the same country or the same country. Look like one person with many names. When you are one person, you should have only one name. So I think thank you very much, Sandy. Thank you again, Bruno. Thank you, Pascal, Patrick. Thank you, Raymond. Thank you, Pascal. Thank you, Bande. And then see you soon. Over. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.